The gold band caught the afternoon light as Grace Oakes placed it on the pawnbroker's counter. Her hands trembled so violently she nearly dropped it twice before finally letting go. "Is this all you got?" The man behind the counter squinted at the simple wedding ring through his thick spectacles, turning it over with tobacco-stained fingers that made Grace want to snatch it back and run from the musty shop. "It is worth something," Grace said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "It is real gold." The pawnbroker grunted, pulling out a small scale. Outside the shop window, the dusty main street of Jackson, Wyoming stretched before her, bustling with afternoon traffic in the summer of 1882. Horses tied to hitching posts swished their tails against flies, and a freight wagon rumbled past, heading toward the Mercantile. Grace watched it all through the grimy glass, trying not to think about what she was doing, trying not to remember James slipping this very ring onto her finger 5 years ago under a cottonwood tree, with the mountains watching. $5, the pawnbroker said. Grace's head snapped back toward him. "Fives? That ring is worth at least 20. "Maybe to you. To me, it is $5 worth of melted gold." He pushed the ring back toward her across the scarred wooden counter. "Take it or leave it." Grace stared at the band, at the tiny flowers James had asked the jeweler to engrave around the inside. He had saved for 8 months to buy it. She could still see his face when he presented it to her, so proud, so full of hope for their future together. That future had included the homestead they would build, the children they would raise, and growing old while watching the seasons change across the valley. It had not included James being thrown from a spooked horse and breaking his neck 2 years into their marriage. It had not included Grace trying to work their 160 acres alone, watching their savings dwindle and then disappear. It had not included the cruel reality that a woman alone could not make enough to survive. Not when the crop failed, not when the winter had been so harsh, and not when her last canned goods were gone and her stomach had been empty for 2 days. "I will take it," she whispered. The pawnbroker nodded, counted out $5 and swept the ring into a drawer before Grace could change her mind. She gathered the coins in her handkerchief, the metal cold against her palm, and walked out into the bright July sunshine, feeling like she had just buried James all over again. The Mercantile was 3 buildings down. Grace walked slowly, acutely aware of how loose her dress had become, how her boots needed new soles, and how she must look to the respectable townspeople who passed her on the wooden sidewalk. She had been one of them once, married and hopeful. Now she was just another struggling widow, and Jackson had plenty of those. Inside the Mercantile, she bought flour, cornmeal, a small bag of beans, and a precious quarter-pound of salt pork. The supplies took 4 of her $5. She tucked the last dollar into her boot and carried her parcels back out into the afternoon heat, trying not to calculate how long these provisions might last if she was very, very careful. "Mrs. Oakes!" Grace turned to see Sally Henderson hurrying toward her, a parasol bobbing above her elaborate hat. Sally had been at her wedding and had brought soup after James died, but she had slowly stopped visiting as Grace's circumstances became an uncomfortable reminder of how quickly fortune could turn. "Sally, how nice to see you." "I have been meaning to call," Sally said, slightly breathless. "How are you managing out at the homestead?" The polite lie rose automatically to Grace's lips. "Well enough, thank you." "I heard you might be looking for work. My cousin mentioned needing help at the boarding house, washing linens and such. The pay is not much, but it is something." Grace felt heat rise to her cheeks. 2 years ago, she would have been the one offering charity, not receiving it. "That is kind of you to think of me. I will consider it." Sally's expression turned pitying. "Grace, there is no shame in needing help. These are difficult times for a woman alone." "I manage," Grace said more sharply than she intended. She softened her tone. "Truly, Sally, I appreciate your concern. I should get these supplies home before the heat spoils the pork." She escaped before Sally could press further, before the pity in those kind eyes could crack the careful shell Grace had built around her pride. Chapter The walk back to where Dissy had left her wagon seemed longer than usual, and the parcels felt heavier. Her horse, an aging mare named Bess, who had been James's before the accident, stood patiently in the shade behind the land office. Grace was loading her supplies into the wagon bed when she heard men's voices rising from the pawn shop she had left not 20 minutes before. "I said I want to see everything you got in gold," a man's voice said, deep and firm. "Rings, watches, all of it." "Now see here, I am a legitimate businessman," the pawnbroker sputtered. "Never said you were not, just want to look at what you got." Grace should have climbed into her wagon and left. What happened in the pawn shop was none of her concern, but something in that voice made her pause, made her glance back at the shop door. A man stood in the entrance, tall and lean in dusty traveling clothes, a battered hat pushed back on his head. Even from a distance, she could see the way he held himself, relaxed but alert, like men who spent their lives outdoors, ready for whatever might come. A horse was tied nearby, a fine buckskin gelding with good lines and intelligent eyes. The pawnbroker scurried out, arms full of various items which he spread on a table the cowboy had dragged into the sunlight. Grace watched as the tall man examined each piece carefully, holding them up, checking weights and quality with the eye of someone who knew his business. Then he picked up a simple gold band, turned it to catch the light, and went very still. Grace's breath caught. Even from where she stood, she knew which ring he held. She should look away, should leave, but her feet seemed rooted to the dusty ground. "How much for this one?" the cowboy asked. "That one just came in, $10. "You lying cheat," the cowboy said mildly. "You did not pay more than 5 for it, and we both know it. The price is 10 if you want it." The cowboy studied the ring another moment, then nodded. "All right, $10. He counted out the money from a worn leather wallet, pocketed the ring, and turned away from the pawnbroker's greedy grin. Grace finally unfroze, turning quickly back to her wagon and fumbling with the reins. She did not want him to see her face. She did not want a stranger to witness the tears that suddenly threatened. It was just a ring, she told herself fiercely, just a piece of metal she had needed to sell to survive. It meant nothing that someone else owned it now. "Madame, excuse me, madame." Grace's hands stilled on the reins. She took a breath, wiped quickly at her eyes, and turned. The cowboy stood a few feet away, hat in hand. Up close, she could see he was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 25 or 26 to her own 23 years. His face was weathered from sun and wind, but handsome in a lean, angular way. Dark hair curled slightly over his collar, but it was his eyes that caught her, gray-blue like storm clouds and filled with an emotion she could not quite name. "Yes?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "This might be forward of me, madam, but I could not help noticing you came from that pawn shop earlier, and then I saw this." He held up the ring. "It has flowers engraved inside, and a date, June 14th, 1877. Grace's throat tightened. She could not speak. "My name is Quinn Lawson," the man continued gently. "I have been trailing through Wyoming looking for ranch work, and I stopped in Jackson to rest my horse and get a decent meal. But when I saw all those rings in that pawn shop, I got to thinking about my own mother who had to sell her wedding ring after my father died. She never got over losing that ring, said it felt like losing him all over again." "I am sorry for your mother's loss," Grace managed, "but I do not see what that has to do with me." Quinn turned the ring between his fingers. "This ring was not sitting in that shop gathering dust. It still shines. Someone took care of it, loved it. And when I saw you standing here, saw your face when I picked it up. Well," he paused, "is it yours?" Grace lifted her chin. "It was. I sold it. That makes it yours now." "Why did you sell it?" "That is none of your concern, Mr. Lawson." "No, madam. I suppose it is not." He stepped closer, and Grace caught the scent of leather, horse, and sage. "But I am going to make it my concern anyway, because I do not think you wanted to sell this ring. I think you needed to, and I think that whatever made you need to, you are probably too proud to ask for help with." My circumstances are my own affair, Grace said stiffly. They are, Quinn agreed. But this ring right now, that is my affair. I paid $10 for it and I can do whatever I want with it. So here is what I'm going to do. Before Grace could step back, he reached for her left hand. She pulled away. Mr. Lawson, please. Just let me do this one thing, he said quietly. Something in his voice, in those storm cloud eyes, made Grace go still. Slowly, she extended her hand. Her ring finger was bare, paler than the rest where the gold had protected it from the sun. Quinn slipped the ring back onto her finger. It slid into place like it had never been gone, settling into the slight indentation it had worn in her skin over 5 years of marriage. There, Quinn said softly. That is where it belongs. Grace stared at the ring, then at Quinn, then back at the ring, her vision blurred. I cannot accept this. You paid for it. I have no way to repay you. I do not want repayment. Then what do you want? The words came out sharper than she intended, born of exhaustion, hunger, and the surreal feeling of having her wedding ring back on her hand when she had been certain she would never see it again. Quinn settled his hat back on his head, and for the first time he smiled. It transformed his face, softening the hard edges and lighting up his eyes. Well, madam, I suppose I want to know your name and maybe to understand what brought you to that pawn shop. And if you will let me, I would like to help however I can. You do not even know me. No, madam, I do not. But I know what it is like to be alone and struggling, and I know my mother would have wept with gratitude if someone had bought back her ring and given it to her. She died still mourning the loss of it. His expression grew serious. Let me do for you what no one could do for her, please. Grace touched the ring with her other hand, turning it slightly, feeling the familiar weight of it. She should refuse. She should thank him politely and send him on his way. She did not need charity. She did not need a stranger's pity. But the ring was warm on her finger, and Quinn Lawson was looking at her with such honest kindness that something in her chest cracked open. Grace, she whispered. My name is Grace Oakes. Quinn's smile widened. Mrs. Oakes, would you allow me to buy you dinner? That restaurant across the way looks decent enough, and I would count it an honor to share a meal with you. Grace's stomach chose that moment to growl audibly. She pressed a hand to it, mortified, but Quinn's expression did not change. Please, he said again. She should say no, but the ring gleamed on her finger. She had not sat down to a proper meal in longer than she cared to admit, and Quinn Lawson had kind eyes. Yes, Grace heard herself say. Yes, I will have dinner with you. The restaurant was called Mabel's, and it smelled like heaven. Fresh bread, roasting meat, and coffee so strong and rich Grace could taste it in the air. The lunch crowd had thinned, leaving only a few customers scattered among the tables. Quinn held the door for her, then guided her to a corner table away from the windows. Order whatever you like, he said after they were seated. I mean it, whatever you want. When the waitress came, Grace tried to order modestly, just the stew and bread. But Quinn interrupted, ordering pot roast with potatoes and carrots, fresh green beans, pie, coffee, and milk. That is too much, Grace protested after the waitress left. Then we will get you a basket to take home what you do not finish, Quinn said easily. No shame in that. They sat in silence for a moment. Grace twisted the ring on her finger, still not quite believing it was there. Quinn watched her with those observant eyes, patient, not pushing. My husband died, Grace said finally, 2.5 years ago. We had a homestead about 8 miles north of town. After he passed, I tried to keep it going, but she trailed off, shrugging. Everything that could go wrong did. Bad weather, crop failure, fence repairs, I could not afford. I sold off our cattle one by one, then the chickens, then the tools. Today I sold my ring because I had not eaten in 2 days, and I was out of options. Quinn's jaw tightened. 2 days. I am not telling you this for pity, Grace said quickly. You asked and I'm explaining, but I do not need anyone to feel sorry for me. I am managing. Are you? Quinn asked gently. Because from where I am sitting, it seems like you have been doing everything alone for so long that you have forgotten what it is like to let someone help. I do not need help. Everyone needs help sometimes, Grace. There is no shame in it. The waitress returned with their food before Grace could respond. The sight and smell of the meal made her dizzy. Hot meat swimming in rich gravy, potatoes roasted until their edges crisped, vegetables that were not limp or old, and fresh bread with butter melting into the warm crust. Grace picked up her fork, determined to eat slowly to maintain her dignity, but the first bite hit her empty stomach and she could not help herself. She ate quickly, efficiently, barely tasting it in her need to fill the gnawing emptiness inside her. Quinn ate his own meal without comment, occasionally refilling her coffee cup or passing the bread basket. He did not stare. He did not make her feel ashamed of her hunger. He simply let her eat. Finally, Grace pushed back from her plate, more satisfied than she had been in months. The waitress had wrapped up the remaining food and a neat package sat waiting beside Grace's elbow. "Thank you," Grace said quietly, "for the meal and for the ring. It was more kindness than I deserved from a stranger." "Why would you not deserve kindness?" Quinn asked. "Because I should be stronger, should have planned better, should not have let things get so desperate." "Grace, your husband died and left you alone trying to work a homestead. That would break most men, let alone a woman on her own. The fact that you have lasted this long, that you have not given up, that takes more strength than you give yourself credit for." Grace blinked hard, fighting the tears that threatened again. She was so tired of crying. "What do you want from me, Quinn Lawson? Why are you doing this?" Quinn was quiet for a long moment, turning his coffee cup in slow circles on the table. "I told you about my mother. What I did not tell you is that she died when I was 17. Died worn out and beaten down because she had no one to help her and she was too proud to ask. I have spent the last 8 years working ranches, trailing cattle, doing whatever work I could find. I have saved most of what I have earned, living rough and simple. And the whole time I kept thinking that someday I would find someone who needed help the way my mother needed it, and I would have the means to make a difference." He met her eyes. "Then today I walked into that pawn shop and saw your ring sitting there, and I saw you at your wagon and I thought, here she is. Here is someone who needs help, who would probably die before asking for it, who is strong and brave and doing her best. See, I mean, I have the means to help, so that is what I want to do. Help you. No strings, no expectations. Just let me help." "For how long?" Grace asked. "Until your conscience is clear. Until you have paid whatever debt you think you owe your mother's memory." The words came out harsher than she intended, but Grace was exhausted, overwhelmed, and afraid to trust this sudden kindness. Quinn did not flinch. "For as long as it takes, or as long as you will let me, whichever comes first. I cannot pay you back. I did not ask you to. People do not just help for no reason. Everyone wants something." "Then maybe I want to know that at least one person I tried to help made it through to the other side," Quinn said. "Maybe that is what I get out of this, the knowledge that I made a difference when it mattered." Grace studied him across the table, this stranger who had walked into her life and turned it upside down in the space of an hour. He looked back at her steadily, no guile in his expression, no hidden agenda that she could detect. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked finally. "Let me see your homestead. Let me assess what needs doing. I have saved about $400 over the years. That money has been sitting in banks across the West waiting for something worth spending it on. Let me invest it in your land and making it work again." $400. Grace's voice came out strangled. That was a fortune, more money than she had ever seen at one time. "You would spend that on a stranger's failed homestead?" "I would invest it in a future worth building," Quinn corrected. "Yours, and maybe if you would let me mine too." "What does that mean?" Quinn leaned forward, his expression intent. "It means I have been looking for a reason to stop drifting, for a place to put down roots, for something or someone worth staying for. I felt it the moment I picked up that ring, Grace. Something told me this was important, that you were important. Call it instinct, call it fate, call it whatever you like, but I am asking you to take a chance. Let me help you save your homestead. Let me work beside you to make it thrive again, and let us see what grows from there. You do not know me, Grace repeated weakly. So let me get to know you, Quinn said simply. What do you say? Grace looked down at her ring, gleaming softly in the restaurant's lamplight. She thought of her empty cabin, her failing land, the long, lonely months and years stretching ahead with nothing but more of the same. She thought of James, who had believed in possibilities, who had never been afraid to take a chance. What would he want her to do? She met Quinn's eyes. All right, you can come see the homestead, but I am not making any promises beyond that. Quinn's face lit up with that transforming smile. Quinn hissed, that is all I am asking for, a chance. They left Mabel's together, Grace carrying her basket of leftovers and Quinn walking beside her to where their horses waited. The afternoon was sliding toward evening, shadows lengthening across Jackson's Main Street. Grace climbed up onto her wagon seat, feeling the weight of the meal in her stomach and the ring solid and real on her finger. I will follow you out, Quinn said, swinging up onto his buckskin. Take your time, we have got plenty of daylight left. The ride out to the homestead took about 40 minutes at the wagon's steady pace. Grace had traveled this road so many times she could have done it blindfolded, past the church on the edge of town, past the Turner place with its well-tended fields, past the creek that ran high and cold with snowmelt in spring and slowed to a trickle by late summer. Her property started where the fence post leaned drunkenly, wire sagging between them. She had repaired what she could, but there was only so much one person could do with limited materials and no money for more. Quinn rode in silence, but she could feel him observing everything. The broken fence, the fields that should have been green with crops but instead grew mostly weeds and volunteer grass, and the barn with half its roof missing, damaged in a windstorm 2 springs ago that she had never been able to properly fix. The cabin, at least, was sound, built well by James with chinked logs and a good stone chimney. Grace pulled the wagon up in front and climbed down, suddenly seeing her home through Quinn's eyes. The peeling paint around the door, the window that had been covered with oiled paper after the glass broke, and the general air of neglect and poverty that hung over everything. I know it does not look like much, she started to say. It looks like good land that needs good hands working it, Quinn interrupted. He had dismounted and stood turning slowly, taking it all in. Solid cabin, good water source from that creek. The fields will recover once they are properly worked. The barn needs a new roof, but the frame is intact. Fencing is the worst of it, but that is just labor and wire. Mind. He turned to her, his expression thoughtful. How much land do you have? 160 acres. James filed the homestead claim in 1876. He proved up on it 6 months before he died. So the land is yours, free and clear? Grace nodded. It is all I have left. But I cannot work it alone. I tried. I am not strong enough to do all that needs doing. No one person is, Quinn said. But 2 people working together, that is different. He met her eyes. May I stay? Not in the cabin, he added quickly. I can sleep in the barn or outside if you prefer. But let me stay and help you get this place working again. Grace wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the summer heat. It went against everything she had been taught about propriety, allowing a man to stay on her property. Sally Henderson and the other town women would be scandalized. But Sally Henderson was not the one trying to survive on a failing homestead with no help and no prospects. The barn has a loft, Grace heard herself say. It is dry, and there is old hay up there that would make decent bedding. You are welcome to it if you truly want to stay. Quinn's smile could have lit the valley. Thank you, Grace. You will not regret this, I promise. Grace touched her ring, twisting it slightly. I hope you're right, Quinn Lawson, for both our sakes. The next morning, Grace woke to the sound of hammering. She sat up in her narrow bed, disoriented before memory came flooding back. Quinn, the ring, the impossible promise of help. She dressed quickly and went outside to find him already at work on the barn roof, moving with the easy confidence of someone who knew his way around construction. He had his shirt off in the morning heat, and Grace looked away quickly, feeling her cheeks warm. "Good morning," Quinn called down. "Hope I did not wake you. It is past dawn. I should have been up anyway." Grace shaded her eyes against the climbing sun. "Where did you get the lumber?" "Had some materials in my pack. It is not a full repair, but it will keep the rain out for now. I will ride into town later and see about getting proper supplies." "Quinn, I cannot ask you to spend your money on my barn." "You did not ask. I offered." He climbed down, wiping sweat from his face. "Besides, I'm going to be living here while I help you. Makes sense to have a solid roof over my head." Over the next few days, Quinn proved to be relentlessly competent. He repaired fence posts, strung wire, and patched the barn roof properly with lumber he bought and hauled out from Jackson himself. He was up before dawn every morning and worked until dusk, pausing only for the meals Grace insisted on preparing. She used the supplies she had bought and the leftovers Quinn kept bringing back from town visits, and slowly she felt her strength returning. The hollow feeling in her stomach faded and color returned to her cheeks. All the while Quinn worked. They fell into an easy routine. Grace tended the cabin and prepared meals while Quinn tackled the heavier repairs. In the evenings, they sat on the porch steps and talked, watching the sunset behind the mountains. Grace learned that Quinn was 26, originally from Kansas, orphaned young and on his own since. He had worked ranches from Texas to Montana, saved his money, and dreamed of having his own place someday. He was easy to talk to, with a dry sense of humor that surprised laughter out of her when she least expected it. Slowly, carefully, Grace felt something inside her begin to thaw. The hard knot of grief and loneliness she had carried for so long started to loosen. She caught herself looking forward to Quinn's company, to the sound of his voice, to the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled at something she said. It terrified her. One evening, about 2 weeks after Quinn had arrived, they sat on the porch watching heat lightning flicker on the horizon. Quinn had been unusually quiet through dinner, and now he cleared his throat. "I have been thinking," he said, "about the fields. We have about 6 weeks before we need to worry about frost. If we planted turnips and beets, maybe some late cabbage, we could still get a crop in. Not enough to sell, but enough to see you through the winter." "Us?" Grace said without thinking. "Enough to see us through the winter?" Quinn turned to look at her, something warm and hopeful in his expression. "Us?" Grace felt her cheeks heat. "I only meant alterata. If you are planning to stay through harvest, I assumed." "I am planning to stay as long as you will have me," Quinn said quietly, "but I did not want to presume." They sat in charged silence for a moment. Grace twisted her ring, gathering courage. "Why did you really buy back my ring?" she asked. "The truth, Quinn. Not the story about your mother, though I believe that too. But why this ring? Why me?" Quinn was quiet for so long, Grace thought he might not answer. Then he said, "When I picked up that ring and saw you at your wagon, I felt something I have not felt in years. Recognition, maybe, like I knew you, even though we had never met. And when I looked at your face, I saw strength and sadness and determination all mixed together. And I thought, there is a woman worth knowing, worth helping, worth standing beside." He turned to face her fully. "My mother's story is true, but it is not the whole truth. The whole truth is that I looked at you and felt my heart move in a way it never has before. And I bought that ring back because I could not stand the thought of you losing something precious because the world had been cruel. And I stayed because I wanted to know you, because I hoped that maybe, given time, you might want to know me too." Grace's breath caught. "Quinn, I know it is too soon," he said quickly. "I know you are still mourning your husband. I am not asking for anything you cannot give. But I wanted you to know. I wanted to be honest." Grace looked at him in the fading light. This man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to pray. He had given back her ring, fed her, worked beside her, and asked for nothing in return. And somewhere in the past 2 weeks, she had started to feel again, started to hope again. James has been gone for 2.5 years, she said slowly. I loved him. I will always love him. But he is gone, and I am still here. And I think you would want me to keep living, not just surviving. She took a breath. You asked what I want you to know. I want you to know that having you here has changed everything. The work is still hard, but it does not feel hopeless anymore. The days are still long, but they are not lonely. And when I look at you, I feel something I thought had died with James. I feel like maybe there is a future worth building after all. Quinn's hand found hers between them on the porch step. His fingers were rough with calluses, warm and solid. Grace, I am not ready for promises, she said. Not yet, but I'm ready to try to see where this goes, to build something with you if you are willing to be patient. I can be patient, Quinn said, his voice rough with emotion. I can be whatever you need me to be. Grace turned her hand in his, lacing their fingers together. In the distance, thunder rumbled. The air smelled like rain coming, the first real rain they had seen in weeks. We should get the tools under cover, she said, before the storm hits. They stood together, still holding hands, and Quinn smiled down at her. We will get through this storm and all the ones after it. Together, Grace said, and found she believed it. The rain came that night, a heavy, soaking rain that drummed on the cabin roof and turned the fields dark. Grace lay in her bed listening to it, touching her ring in the darkness, thinking about the man sleeping in her barn and the strange and wonderful turn her life had taken. The next morning dawned clear and fresh, the world washed clean. Quinn appeared at the cabin door with a bucket of fresh milk. Got a cow? Grace asked in surprise. Bought her yesterday in town, figured we needed one. Quinn set the bucket on the table. Her name is Molly and she is gentle as they come. Also bought chickens, 6 good layers and a rooster. They are settling into the hen house I fixed up yesterday. Quinn, how much have you spent? Does not matter. What matters is that we are building something here. He leaned against the doorframe, looking at her with such warmth it made her chest ache. Let me do this, Grace. Let me give you back some of what you lost. Over the following weeks, the homestead transformed. The fields were planted with late-season crops, the fences stood straight and strong, and the barn gleamed with its new roof. Molly provided fresh milk and butter, and the chickens laid eggs that Grace gathered each morning in her apron. Through it all, Quinn and Grace worked side by side, growing closer with each passing day. They talked while they worked, sharing stories of their pasts. Grace told Quinn about growing up in Colorado, about meeting James at a church social, about their brief, happy marriage. Quinn talked about his rootless childhood, his years trailing from place to place, and his dreams of putting down roots. I never had a home, he said one afternoon while they were planting turnip seeds. Not a real one, just places I stayed until it was time to move on. And now? Grace asked. Quinn looked at her, then around at the homestead, at the land they were working together to restore. Now I think I'm starting to understand what home means. In August, Sally Henderson came calling, driving out in her husband's buggy with a basket of preserves and barely concealed curiosity. Grace saw her coming and felt her stomach tighten. Grace, Sally called, climbing down from the buggy. I have been meaning to visit, but you know how busy things get. I brought you some of my blackberry preserves. Her eyes swept the yard, taking in the repaired barn, the neat fences, and the chickens scratching in the dirt. My goodness, what a transformation! However did you manage? I had help, Grace said carefully. As if summoned, Quinn appeared from the barn, leading Molly toward the pasture. He saw Sally and tipped his hat. Madame! Sally's eyes went wide. She looked at Quinn, then at Grace, then back at Quinn. I see, Sally said. It is not what you think, Grace said quickly, though she could feel her cheeks burning. Quinn is a ranch hand I hired. He sleeps in the barn and helps with the heavy work. Of course, Sally said, but her tone suggested she believed nothing of the sort. How fortunate you found someone so capable. After Sally left, Grace found Quinn in the barn checking Molly's hooves. That woman is going to tell everyone in Jackson that I have a man living here. Well, I am living here, Quinn pointed out reasonably. You know what I mean. She will make it sound improper. Quinn straightened, meeting her eyes. Then maybe we should make it proper. Grace's heart skipped. What? Marry me, Grace. The words came out simple and direct. Not because of gossip, though that is a consideration. Not because I have invested money in this place, though that is practical, but because I love you. Because somewhere in these past 2 months, you have become the most important thing in my life. Because when I think about the future, all I see is you. Grace stared at him, her mind reeling. Quinn, we have only known each other 2 months. I know. And if you need more time, I will wait. But I also know my own heart. I knew it the day I bought back your ring. I knew it every morning I woke up and got to work beside you. I knew it every evening we sat on that porch and talked until the stars came out. He stepped closer. I love you, Grace Oaks. And I believe, I hope, that you might love me too. I do, Grace whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. I do love you, but I am frightened. I love James and I lost him. What if I lose you too? You might, Quinn said gently. Life has no guarantees. But would you rather live afraid of loss or brave enough to love anyway? Because I would rather have one day of loving you openly than a lifetime of holding back out of fear. Grace felt tears slip down her cheeks. Happy tears this time, not sad ones. You are asking me to risk my heart again. I am asking you to trust me with it, Quinn corrected. He took her hands in his. I cannot promise I will never leave you, but I can promise I will never want to. I can promise I will work every day to build a life with you. I can promise that whatever comes, we will face it together. Grace looked down at their joined hands, at the ring on her finger that Quinn had bought back and returned to her. It had been James's ring, bought with his love, worn in his memory, but it was also hers, her symbol of commitment, of hope, of believing in love despite the risk of loss. Yes, she said, looking up to meet Quinn's eyes. Yes, I will marry you. Quinn's face transformed with joy. He pulled her close, holding her tight, and Grace wrapped her arms around him, feeling safe, cherished, and ready for whatever came next. Me? And when he asked Grace the same question, she looked into Quinn's storm cloud eyes and said with equal certainty, I will. Quinn had a new ring ready, a simple gold band that matched her wedding ring. He slipped it onto her finger beside the first one, and Grace felt something settle in her chest. The past and the future joined together. James's love and Quinn's love, both honored, both real. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the preacher said. You may kiss your bride. Quinn cupped Grace's face gently and kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. Grace kissed him back, tasting salt from tears she had not realized she was crying. Happy tears, grateful tears, tears for everything she had lost and everything she had found. They had a small celebration dinner at Mabel's, the same restaurant where Quinn had bought her that first meal. It felt like both yesterday and a lifetime ago. Grace ate slowly this time, savoring every bite, laughing at Quinn's stories, feeling her heart so full she thought it might burst. That night, Quinn carried her over the threshold of the cabin that was now theirs together. He had spent the past week moving his things from the barn, making space for himself among Grace's belongings. Now he set her down gently and lit the lamps, filling the small space with warm light. Husband, Grace said, testing the word. Wife, Quinn replied, and pulled her close. They stood together in the lamplight, holding each other, taking the first steps into their new life together. Grace felt the last of her grief and fear finally release its hold. She would always love James, would always carry him in her heart. But she was ready now to love Quinn too, to build a future with him, to trust in the possibility of happiness again. The fall passed in a blur of work and joy. They harvested their late crops, storing turnips and beets and cabbage in the root cellar Quinn had dug. The chickens laid steadily, providing eggs to sell in town. Molly gave rich milk that Grace churned into butter, and slowly, steadily, the homestead became profitable again. Quinn proved to be everything Grace could have hoped for in a partner. He worked hard but knew when to rest. He was gentle with the animals and patient with setbacks. He made her laugh with his dry observations about their neighbors and their stubborn rooster, and at night he held her close and whispered words of love until she fell asleep feeling cherished and safe. In November, Grace realized her monthly courses had not come. She said nothing at first, afraid to hope, afraid to jinx it. But as the weeks passed and her body began to change, she could no longer deny the truth. She told Quinn one evening after dinner, her hands twisted nervously in her apron. I am with child. Quinn went very still. Then he crossed the room in 2 strides and swept her into his arms, spinning her around while she laughed and protested. Careful, you will make me sick. A baby? Quinn said, setting her down but keeping his arms around her. We are going to have a baby. Are you happy? Grace asked, searching his face. Happy? Quinn laughed, the sound full of wonder. Grace, I am the happiest man in Wyoming, in the whole world. Messias. Maiso. He placed a hand gently on her still flat stomach. Our child, yours and mine, a family. Grace covered his hand with her own. I was afraid to hope for this. After James died, I thought I would never have children, never have a family of my own. You have a family now, Quinn said firmly. You have me, and soon you will have our baby, and whatever else comes, we will face it together. Mime, bias. The winter was long and cold, but Grace barely noticed. She was wrapped in Quinn's love and the wonder of the life growing inside her. Quinn fussed over her constantly, insisting she rest and taking on even the lightest chores to spare her strength. I am pregnant, not dying, Thassi, Grace protested one afternoon when Quinn refused to let her carry water from the well. You are carrying our child, Quinn corrected. And I will be cursed before I let anything happen to either of you. The baby was born on a warm day in June, almost exactly a year after Grace had walked into that pawn shop and sold her wedding ring. The labor was hard, attended by the midwife from town and Sally Henderson, who had become a closer friend over the winter months. Quinn paced outside the cabin wearing a path in the dirt until finally the midwife opened the door and beckoned him in. Grace lay exhausted on the bed, sweaty and pale, but smiling. In her arms was a tiny bundle, red-faced and squalling. "A boy," the midwife announced. "A healthy boy." Quinn approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe. Grace shifted the baby so he could see their son's face, scrunched and angry at the indignity of being born. "He is perfect," Quinn whispered. "He is ours," Grace said, and held out a hand to Quinn. "Come meet your son." They named him James after Grace's first husband, with Quinn as his middle name. It felt right to honor the past while celebrating the future. Baby Jamie had his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair, and Quinn fell utterly in love from the first moment he held his son. The years that followed were full and rich. The homestead prospered under Quinn's capable management and Grace's careful planning. They expanded their herd, bought more chickens, and planted larger crops each spring. Quinn built additions onto the cabin as their family grew, adding a proper bedroom for them and a smaller room for Jamie. In the winter of 1885, Grace gave birth to twin girls, Clara and Margaret, identical bundles of squalling energy that kept both parents running. Quinn proved to be a devoted father, patient and loving even during the sleepless nights and chaotic days. Jaime grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved following his father around the ranch, learning everything Quinn could teach him. The twins were wilder, always getting into mischief, but affectionate and bright. Grace watched her children grow with a heart so full of gratitude she sometimes had to pause in her work just to say a prayer of thanks. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Quinn surprised Grace with a new wedding ring. It had small diamonds set into the gold sparkling in the lamplight. "Quinn, this must have cost a fortune," Grace protested. "You are worth a fortune," Quinn said simply. "You are worth everything to me. I wanted you to have something beautiful, something that shows how much I love you." Grace threw her arms around him, kissing him thoroughly while the children giggled in the corner. "I do not need diamonds. I have everything I need right here." "I know," Quinn said, slipping the new ring onto her finger beside the original wedding band that had started their whole story. "But I wanted you to have it anyway. To remember that day in Jackson when a desperate widow sold her ring and a drifting cowboy bought it back. The day our lives changed forever." "I remember," Grace said softly. "I remember everything." "Gee." She looked at her hand, at the 3 rings circling her finger. James's ring that Quinn had returned to her, representing her past and the love she had lost. The simple band Quinn had given her at their wedding, representing new beginnings and second chances. And now this beautiful new ring, representing their present and future, the life they had built together through hard work, faith, and love. 3 rings, she said. Each one tells part of our story. "Our story is not finished yet," Quinn said, pulling her close. "We have got years ahead of us still." He was right. They did have years. Good years, full of love and laughter and the normal struggles of life. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick children and injured livestock, bad crops and good harvests. Through it all, Grace and Quinn stood together, facing whatever came as a team. Jaime grew tall and strong, eventually taking over much of the ranch work as Quinn's hair turned gray at the temples. The twins married within a year of each other, Clara to a banker's son from Jackson, and Margaret to a fellow rancher's boy from the neighboring valley. Both stayed close, giving Grace and Quinn a pile of grandchildren who filled the homestead with noise and chit-chat. In 1895, on a warm summer evening much like the one where Quinn had first proposed, they sat together on their porch watching the sunset. Their hands were clasped between them, rings glinting in the fading light. Quinn's hair was more silver than dark now, and Grace had laugh lines around her eyes, but they fit together as perfectly as they had from the beginning. "You ever think about that day in Jackson?" Quinn asked. "When I bought back your ring?" "I think about it all the time," Grace admitted. "How desperate I was, how hopeless everything seemed, how I thought my life was over. And now—" Grace squeezed his hand. "Now I know it was just beginning. I had to lose everything to find you, Had to sell that ring so you could buy it back. Had to hit bottom so I could learn to rise again. I was so afraid you would say no, Quinn said. I was so afraid. When I asked if I could help, when I asked you to let me stay, when I asked you to marry me, every time I was terrified you would refuse. I was terrified too, Grace confessed. Terrified to trust again, to love again, to risk my heart after it had been so broken. But you made it impossible not to love you. You gave me back my ring, and then you gave me back my life. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear overhead. Inside the house, they could hear Jaime moving around, getting ready to head home to his own wife and children. The twins would visit tomorrow, bringing the grandchildren for Sunday dinner. Life was full and busy and exactly as it should be. I would do it all again, Quinn said quietly. Every moment, every choice, every risk, all of it, just to end up here with you. So would I, Grace said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. She looked down at her rings, still wearing all three after all these years, the original band from James, now worn smooth with age, the simple band Quinn had given her, equally worn from years of work and life, and the beautiful diamond ring, still sparkling as brightly as the day he had given it to her. 3 rings, 3 loves. The love she had lost, the love she had found, and the love that had sustained her through everything. All of them were part of her story, all of them precious, all of them leading her to this moment on this porch with this man who had changed her life. Thank you, Grace said, turning to Quinn, for buying back my ring, for giving me a second chance at happiness, for loving me when I thought I would never be loved again. Thank you for letting me, Quinn replied, for being brave enough to trust me, for building this life with me, for making every day an adventure worth living. He leaned over and kissed her, soft and sweet, the kiss of 2 people who knew each other deeply and loved each other completely. Grace kissed him back, tasting the promise of more years ahead, more sunsets watched together, more moments of simple, perfect joy. When they finally pulled apart, Quinn kept her hand in his thumb brushing over her rings. I love you, Grace Lawson. I love you too, Quinn Lawson. Today, tomorrow, and all the days after that. As the last light faded from the sky and the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, Grace and Quinn sat together in the darkness, wrapped in love and contentment, and the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived. The widow who had sold her ring for food had become a wife, a mother, and a grandmother, surrounded by family and prosperity and love beyond measure. And it had all started with a desperate moment in a pawn shop, a kind stranger with storm cloud eyes and a simple gold ring that had found its way home. 3 rings on her finger, each one a chapter in her story, each one a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope could survive. That love lost did not mean love was over, that second chances were real, and sometimes the best parts of life came after the worst. Grace touched her rings one more time, feeling their familiar weight and their precious presence. Then she leaned against Quinn's shoulder and watched the stars come out, grateful for every moment that had led her here, grateful for every moment still to come, and grateful most of all for the cowboy who had bought back her ring and given her a future worth living. Their story had begun with an ending, with loss and desperation, and a ring sold to survive. But it had become something beautiful, something lasting, something worth every risk and every tear. And as Grace drifted off to sleep that night in the arms of the man she loved, she knew with absolute certainty that her story had turned out exactly as it was meant to. The homestead Quinn and Grace built together would stay in their family for generations, passed down through Jaime and eventually his children. The tale of how Quinn bought back Grace's ring became family legend, told and retold at holiday gatherings, a reminder to each new generation about the power of kindness, the importance of second chances, and the enduring nature of love. But that night on the porch, watching the stars with Quinn's arms around her and her 3 rings gleaming softly in the darkness, Grace knew none of what was to come. She knew only that she was happy, that she was loved, and that the ring on her finger was finally where it belonged. Home, just like her, just like Quinn, just like all of them, together at last. And in the mountains surrounding Jackson, Wyoming, the summer wind whispered through the sage and carried with it the promise of morning and all the bright tomorrows still waiting to unfold.